This stress test serves to isolate Marx's rigorous data-gathering mechanics from the unyielding, unscientific dogma that eventually emerged in his name. Understanding historical materialism requires stripping away the political ideology to objectively test its structural logic against the rules of science. During the mid-19th century, Marx spent his days completely immersed in the archives of the British Museum reading room. His contemporaries, like Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, treated private property and market dynamics as fixed natural laws, eternal economic categories that existed prior to investigation. Marx firmly rejected this a priori approach. He argued that no economic laws exist outside of their specific historical context. Instead, he insisted that critical knowledge must be based strictly on the analysis of concrete material situations. The data dictates the theory. He built his model from thousands of pages of primary evidence, factory inspector reports, child labor statistics, and the parliamentary blue books that tracked the exact hours and wages of the industrial proletariat. His foundational methodology was aggressively empirical, firmly grounding his entire economic theory in the observable reality of 19th-century industrial capitalism. Thomas Kuhn established that scientific advancement happens through disruptive revolutions rather than just the slow, gradual accumulation of new facts. Kuhn argued that observation is theory-laden. A new theoretical framework changes what scientists recognize as legitimate data, pulling hidden patterns into focus. This exact mechanism applies to Marx's work in political economy. His collaborator, Friedrich Engels, recognized this structural shift in the preface to Capital. Engels compared Marx's discoveries to Antoine Lavoisier's revolution in chemistry. Just as Lavoisier discarded the flawed phlogiston theory by isolating the specific element of oxygen, Marx analyzed the blue books to track the exact labor time required to sustain a worker, then compared it to the total labor time the capitalist actually extracted. By identifying this critical mathematical gap, he isolated the variable of surplus value, the crystallized unpaid labor taken from the worker. Identifying this variable reorganized all existing economic data. Factory hours, machinery costs, and market prices suddenly fit into a coherent, predictive theoretical model. This rigorous interpretive schema functioned like a new lens, reorganizing existing economic data into a completely new paradigm of political economy. Marx's own internal rules stated that his economic laws were not universal. They were strictly bound to the limits of their specific historical period. This brings us to the philosopher Karl Popper, who established the principle of falsifiability as the definitive standard for science. Popper argued that a theory must be capable of being proven wrong by new data in order to maintain its status as a science. This chart visualizes a contradiction in historical materialism. A 19th-century rate of profit trendline advances toward a wall labeled contemporary data. The global economy eventually evolved past Marx's industrial model. As service economies emerged, his original predictions became structurally incompatible with new data, but 20th-century political movements completely ignored this mathematical limit. They treated a historically bound heuristic as an absolute, eternal law. The concepts calcified into a rigid framework. Marxist regimes misrepresented historical events, forcing complex geopolitical crises, like the 1956 Hungarian Revolution, into predetermined ideological boxes. By ignoring the necessity of falsifiability and changing data, these interpretations violated Marx's own empirical rules, transforming a scientific heuristic into a closed ideology. Our epistemological audit reveals a dual legacy. Marx successfully executed a structural revolution for 19th-century economics. The failure occurred when his followers transformed historically limited data into an eternal truth. They fell into the exact a priori trap that Marx originally despised. The closed, unfalsifiable system of the Soviet era stands in direct opposition to the open, analytical framework Marx originally designed to evaluate shifting material conditions. To properly utilize his method today, it must be treated as a critical heuristic tool, a lens for analyzing contemporary data, rather than a prophetic absolute. Marx's primary intellectual legacy rests on a rigorous epistemological demand. the necessity of constantly auditing the empirical reality of our own time.